My name is Lucas. I am 33 years old, an Air Force major and a ghost operative that even my own father doesn't know exists. At MacDill Air Force Base, amidst 200 senior officers, the smell of stale coffee and suffocating silence filled the room as my father, General Nivs, laughed right in my face. He pointed a finger, his voice booming across the auditorium. "Sit down, Lucas. You are a zero. Don't embarrass me." He had no idea that the man who had just walked through the doors, a commanding Navy SEAL colonel, wasn't there to see him. He was there to find me. And my code name wasn't the General's son. My father thought he was the most powerful man in the room. But when I read the file labeled Ghost 13, his face went from flushed red to ghost white. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. Comment, justice, and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. This is a story about the price of arrogance. The air in the strategic briefing room at MacDill Air Force Base always smelled the same. Burnt coffee that had been sitting on the warmer since dawn. Industrial floor wax that the cleaning crews applied every Tuesday night. And the metallic tang of aggressive air conditioning that kept the room at a precise 68 degrees, cold enough to keep 200 officers alert, but not cold enough to complain about. It was a sterile smell, the scent of bureaucracy and power, the smell of careers being made and destroyed with a single word from the right person. I sat in the back row, seat Z14. The plastic chair was uncomfortable by design. These briefings weren't meant to be enjoyed. They were meant to be endured. My spine pressed against the hard back, my uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass, every crease exactly where it should be. My ribbons were perfectly aligned. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. And I made myself small. I made myself invisible. It was a survival mechanism I had perfected over 3 decades, not in SEER school, where they teach you to resist interrogation. Not in sniper training, where they teach you to disappear into the landscape. I learned it at home, at the dinner table, in the long silences that followed my father's disappointment. Down in the front row, under the bright fluorescent lights that washed out everyone's complexion and made them look like corpses in dress uniforms, sat the VIPs, colonels and brigadier generals, deputy commanders and operations officers, men and women who had spent decades climbing the ranks, collecting ribbons, and learning exactly when to laugh at a superior's jokes. And right in the center, holding court like a king on a throne, was my father, General Arthur Nivs, 3 stars, commander of Air Force Special Operations Command, a man whose signature could deploy thousands of troops, a man whose phone calls were returned by senators and whose opinions were quoted in the Wall Street Journal. He was 60 years old, but he wore his years like medals. His silver hair was cut in a high and tight fade that defied gravity and seemed to gleam under the fluorescent lights. His skin was tan from weekends on the golf course with senators and defense contractors. His uniform fit perfectly because he had it tailored by the same man who dressed ambassadors. He was laughing, loudly, at something a lieutenant colonel had just whispered to him. It was a booming, practiced laugh, the kind designed to fill a room and remind everyone who owned the oxygen in it. The kind of laugh that said, "I am the most important person here, and you should be grateful I'm sharing my air with you." "That's rich, Johnson," my father bellowed, slapping the lieutenant colonel on the shoulder hard enough to make the man wince. "That's absolutely rich." The surrounding officers chuckled in unison, a chorus of sycophants. They didn't laugh because it was funny. They laughed because he was a general with 3 stars on his shoulder, and their careers depended on his mood. One negative efficiency report from General Nivs, and you could kiss your promotion goodbye. One glowing recommendation, and you were on the fast track to colonel. Everyone in that room knew the rules of the game, and everyone played. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, They had to be. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted. The heavy double doors at the back of the auditorium burst open with controlled violence. The chatter died instantly. Even my father's laughter was cut short. A man walked in. He didn't walk. He stalked. He was wearing the Navy working uniform, digital camouflage, looking out of place in a sea of Air Force blue. On his collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel. On his chest, the trident of a Navy SEAL. Colonel Marcus Hale. I knew him. Not socially, operationally. We had shared an extraction helicopter in Kandahar 3 years ago. He was a legend in the special operations community. A man who didn't play politics. He played for keeps. He ignored the 200 heads turning toward him. He ignored protocol. He walked straight down the center aisle, boots thudding rhythmically against the carpet. He stopped 10 feet from the stage. "General Neves," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried with terrifying clarity. Gravel and sandpaper. My father blinked, clearly annoyed at having his spotlight stolen. He adjusted his tie. "Colonel Hale, to what do we owe this interruption?" "We're in the middle of a strategic assessment. I don't have time for assessments, General." Hale cut him off. "I have a situation developing in Sierra Tango sector. I need a Tier 1 asset. Immediate deployment." My father scoffed. "We have plenty of pilots here, Colonel. Take your pick." "I don't need a pilot," Hale said. "I need a ghost. Specifically, a TS-SCI clearance sniper with deep reconnaissance capability." The room went silent. TS-SCI, top secret sensitive compartmented information. That wasn't just high clearance. That was doesn't exist clearance. Hale scanned the room. I was told the asset is in this room. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Do it, Lucas." I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed like a gunshot in a library. Heads turned. 200 pairs of eyes shifted from the stage to the back row. I stood at attention, shoulders back, chin up. A perfect statue of military discipline. Marcus Hale turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. There was no recognition in his face, just professional assessment. He nodded once, but before he could speak, a voice boomed from the front. "Sit down." It was my father. He wasn't looking at Hale anymore. He was looking at me. His face had transformed. The benevolent leader was gone. In his place was the man who used to inspect my room with a white glove when I was 10. His face was twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "Major Neves," he barked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you not hear me?" I said, "Sit down, General," I started, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. The colonel requested. "I don't care what he requested," my father shouted, standing up to assert his dominance. He looked around the room, offering a tight, apologetic smile to the other officers. "Apologies, gentlemen," my father said, his tone shifting to a dismissive chuckle. He pointed a finger at me. "My son. He gets confused. He works in administration, logistics, supply chains. He has a tendency to overstate his importance." The room exhaled. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. "Admin," someone whispered nearby. He stood up for a sniper request. "That's rich." "Sit down, Lucas," my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You are a zero in this equation. Don't make me ashamed of you. Not here." I stood there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 lifetimes. He didn't just dismiss me. He erased me. To him, the uniform I wore was a costume. The rank on my shoulder was a decoration. I slowly lowered myself back into the chair. My father nodded, satisfied. He had put the dog back in the kennel. He turned back to Marcus Hale. "Now, Colonel, let's find you a real operator, shall we?" But I wasn't looking at the floor anymore. I lifted my head and stared straight at my father's back. The same look of utter, casual contempt he had always given me. The look that said, You are nothing. The look that said, you are just a disappointment. Before the memory could consume me, Colonel Hale spoke again. His voice was low, but it cut through the room like a blade. General Neves, with all due respect, perhaps you should check your clearance level before you decide who is a real operator in this room. My father's smile faltered. Excuse me. Hale didn't blink. The asset I came for has a service record that you don't have the clearance to read. He's been part of operations that you don't have the clearance to know exist. He pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and held it up. This file is classified Ghost 13. The only reason I'm standing in your briefing room is because your son is the only man on this continent who can complete the mission I need done. The room was dead silent. Not a cough. Not a breath. Hale walked up the center aisle, past my father, past the stage, and stopped directly in front of me. Major Neves. He extended the folder. Your wheel's up in 40 minutes. The president sends his regards. I stood. This time, I didn't ask permission. I took the folder. The weight of it felt like validation. Years of silent sacrifice, finally acknowledged. As I turned to leave, I allowed myself one moment. One look at my father. General Arthur Neves stood frozen at the podium. His face had drained of color. His mouth was slightly open, caught between words that wouldn't come. The other officers were staring at him now, not with respect, but with something else. Confusion. Suspicion. The first cracks in his pedestal. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded and said, General. Then I walked out of the auditorium, following Colonel Hale into the blinding Florida sunlight. Let me tell you how I became Ghost 13. The story starts at my father's Thanksgiving table when I was 18 years old. The turkey was golden brown, the mashed potatoes were perfect, and I was about to make the biggest announcement of my young life. I had been accepted into the United States Air Force Academy. Not just accepted, I was in the top 2% of applicants nationwide. Full scholarship, congressional nomination from our state senator, who had called my father personally to congratulate him. 4 years of perfect grades, varsity sports, volunteer work, and officer candidate preparation had paid off. I thought my father would be proud. I thought, foolishly, that this would be the moment when he finally saw me as worthy. I cleared my throat. The table fell silent. My mother, my younger brother Daniel, my aunt and uncle from Phoenix. Everyone looked at me expectantly. I have some news, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been accepted to the Air Force Academy. Full appointment. I start Beast Barracks in June. For a moment, silence. I watched my father's face, waiting for the smile, the nod, the handshake, the "I'm proud of you, son," that I had been chasing my entire life. My father barely looked up from his turkey. The academy is for leaders, Lucas, he said, sawing at his meat with a steak knife. You don't have the spine for command. You'll wash out before Christmas. He put a piece of turkey in his mouth and chewed. That was it. Conversation over. Announcement dismissed. My mother said nothing. She never said anything when my father spoke. She just passed the cranberry sauce with a nervous smile. My younger brother Daniel smirked into his mashed potatoes. He was 16, already being groomed to be the golden child, the one with potential, the one who would carry on the family legacy the right way. I sat there for the rest of the meal in silence. The turkey tasted like cardboard. The wine tasted like vinegar. Everyone chatted about football and politics and the weather, as if my father hadn't just crushed my proudest achievement under his boot heel. That night, I lay in my childhood bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought about quitting, about proving him right, about becoming the failure he already believed I was. And then something shifted inside me. A cold, hard resolve crystallized in my chest. If he wanted to see me as nothing, fine. I would become something so far beyond his comprehension that he wouldn't even recognize it. I would become invisible in a different way. Not invisible because I was weak, but invisible because I was too dangerous to be seen. I would become a ghost. I graduated from the academy at the top of my class. Not just top 10, not just top 5. Number 1, I had the highest GPA in my graduating year, the best physical fitness scores, and recommendations from professors who said I was the most talented student they had seen in decades. My father didn't attend graduation. He was busy with a congressional hearing. He sent a card that said, "Congratulations," with no personal message. I was recruited into special operations immediately. The instructors at selection saw something in me, a cold focus, an ability to endure pain without breaking, a mind that could calculate wind speed and bullet drop while under fire. I completed SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, escape. They broke me down and built me back up. They taught me to resist interrogation, to survive on nothing, to escape from impossible situations. I completed sniper school at the top of my class. I could hit a target at 2,000 meters. I could lie motionless in the same position for 48 hours. I could become part of the landscape, invisible to the naked eye and to thermal imaging. I was selected for deep reconnaissance certification, then for a program so classified that it doesn't have a name, only a number. A program where operators don't exist on paper, where missions are never acknowledged, where success is measured in enemies who simply stop existing, and no one knows why. They gave me a code name, Ghost 13. For 15 years, I operated in the shadows. Yemen, Syria, locations that don't appear on any map, places where the wrong people had the wrong weapons and the wrong plans until I arrived. I've taken shots from distances my father couldn't comprehend. I've neutralized threats that would have made front-page news if they hadn't been stopped. I've saved lives he'll never know about. I've served 4 presidents who will never acknowledge my existence. And every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every family birthday, I came home. I sat at my father's table. I wore civilian clothes and talked about administrative work at various bases. And I listened to him call me a paper pusher, a desk jockey, a zero, a disappointment who couldn't hack it in the real military. I let him believe it, because that was part of the cover. The ghost has no ego. The ghost doesn't need recognition. The ghost exists only for the mission. And because, deep down, I was waiting for the moment when the truth would speak louder than his insults, waiting for the universe to deliver the justice that I could never seek for myself. That moment came in a briefing room at MacDill Air Force Base on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when a Navy SEAL colonel walked through the doors looking for a ghost, and found me. 3 weeks after the briefing room incident, I completed the mission. The details are still classified. They will remain classified for another 50 years, assuming the government doesn't extend the classification, which they probably will. Some things are too dangerous to ever become public knowledge. But I can tell you this much. There was a compound in the mountains, the kind of place that doesn't show up on satellite imagery, because the people who live there know how to hide from satellites, the kind of place where very bad men plan very bad things. Inside that compound were 12 American hostages, aid workers, journalists, a diplomat's family. They had been held for 8 months. Every rescue attempt had failed. Every negotiation had collapsed. The Pentagon had run out of options, except one. They needed someone who could get in without being seen. Someone who could neutralize the guards without making a sound. Someone who could extract 12 civilians through hostile territory in the dead of night. They needed a ghost. I spent 4 days in position, motionless, watching the compound through my scope. I mapped every patrol route. I timed every guard rotation. I identified every weakness in their security. On the 5th night, I moved. I won't describe what happened next. Some memories are better left in the dark. But when the sun rose the next morning, 12 Americans were on a helicopter heading home, and the men who had held them would never hold anyone again. The Secretary of Defense called me personally. The President sent a handwritten note that I will never be able to show anyone. I received a medal that doesn't officially exist, awarded in a ceremony that never happened, for a mission that was never conducted. And when I returned to base, exhausted and hollow, and still tasting copper in the back of my throat, there was a message waiting for me. My father wanted to meet. We sat across from each other in a coffee shop near the base. It was a civilian place, the kind with exposed brick walls and overpriced lattes. Not the kind of place my father usually frequented. He preferred officers' clubs and private dining rooms, places where his rank meant something. But he had asked to meet on neutral ground. That was significant. He looked smaller than I remembered. The 3 stars were still on his shoulder. He hadn't retired yet, but they seemed heavier somehow. The tan had faded. The commanding presence that used to fill every room had shrunk to fit a single chair. He ordered black coffee. I ordered the same. We sat in silence for a long moment. 2 soldiers who had spent decades in the same army, but never on the same battlefield. Finally, he spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was different, quieter. The boom was gone. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and too hot, but I didn't flinch. "Would you have believed me?" He stared at the table. His hands, the hands that had signed deployment orders and court-martial documents, wrapped around his coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. "Probably not," he admitted. I nodded. "That's why." Silence again. The coffee shop buzzed around us. Students on laptops, couples on dates, people living normal lives. They had no idea that 2 men at a corner table were renegotiating the terms of a 30-year Cold War. "I had a conversation with Colonel Hale," my father said eventually, "after you left the briefing room. He told me things about the places you've been, the things you've done." He looked up at me. He said, "You've saved more lives than he can count." He said, "You're one of the most valuable assets in the entire special operations community." He paused. He said, "You're a hero." I didn't respond. The word hero felt strange. Ghosts aren't heroes. Heroes get parades and medals and recognition. Ghosts just disappear until they're needed again. My father took a deep breath. "I've spent 30 years commanding troops," he said. "I've sent men into battle. I've made decisions that cost lives and saved lives. I thought I understood what it meant to serve." He shook his head. "I didn't understand anything. You've done things I can't even imagine, things I don't have the clearance to know about. And all that time, all those dinners, all those holidays where I called you a—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "A zero," I finished for him. "A desk jockey. A disappointment." He winced like I had slapped him. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore, Dad," I said quietly. "I stopped needing that a long time ago. I stopped needing it somewhere between my first mission and my 20th. I stopped needing it when I realized that the only approval that matters is the approval I give myself." He looked up. His eyes were wet. The great General Arthur Neves, with tears in his eyes, sitting in a coffee shop in Tampa. "But I am willing to start over," I continued, "on equal terms, with respect. Not because you're a general and I'm a major, not because you're my father and I'm your son, but because we're both soldiers who have served this country in our own ways." "I don't know how to do that," he admitted, his voice cracked. "I've never seen you as an equal. I've only seen you as a disappointment," I finished for him. He winced again. "Yes." I leaned forward, close enough that only he could hear me. "Then learn," I said. Because I'm not going anywhere. And I'm done being invisible. Not to the world. The world can never know what I do. But to you? To this family? I'm done being a ghost at my own dinner table. He nodded slowly. Something had shifted between us. The power dynamic that had defined our entire relationship had cracked. Not broken. Cracks don't heal overnight. But cracked. It was a start. It took years. It took therapy. Both of us, separately, learning to understand ourselves before we could understand each other. It took boundaries that felt like walls at first, like fortresses built to keep each other out, but eventually became bridges. My father and I will never be best friends. The scars are too deep for that. 30 years of damage can't be erased with a single conversation, no matter how honest. There are still moments when I see the old contempt flicker in his eyes, old habits dying hard. There are still moments when I feel the old anger rise in my chest, the child inside me still wanting to prove himself. But we have something now that we never had before. Honesty. And from honesty, slowly, painfully, we've built something that almost resembles respect. He retired 3 years after our coffee shop conversation. The ceremony was full of admirals and generals and politicians, all praising his decades of service. I attended in civilian clothes, standing in the back, watching the man I had feared my entire life receive his final salute. Afterward, he found me in the crowd. "I'm glad you came," he said. I nodded. "Me too." That was it. That was all we needed to say. The rest was silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The silence of two soldiers who have fought their battles and laid down their weapons. Last month, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. The ceremony was held at Langley Air Force Base in an auditorium filled with 200 officers. The American flag stood tall and unmoving on the stage. The air smelled of floor wax and fresh-cut lilies. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of blue uniforms. These were my people now. Not because they feared me. Not because their careers depended on my mood. They trusted me. They followed me because I had earned it, mission after mission, year after year. The adjutant barked, "Attention to orders!" 200 pairs of boots hit the floor in unison. The sound echoed like thunder. I didn't flinch. I didn't puff out my chest. I just stood there, breathing in the moment I had waited 33 years for. My eyes scanned the front row, the VIP section, usually filled with generals and senators, people whose presence was a political calculation. But today, there was an old man in the seat of honor. My father was 70 years old now. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform. He had retired 3 years ago. He was wearing a charcoal gray civilian suit that fit him a little too loosely, the shoulders sagging where they used to be broad. His hair, once steel gray and sharp, was now white and thinning. His hands, resting on his lap, trembled slightly. He wasn't the god of war anymore. He was just a grandfather who played golf on Tuesdays, complained about his arthritis, and called me every Sunday to ask about my week. He wasn't invited onto the stage to pin on my rank. I had chosen someone else for that honor. Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez. She was retired now, walking with a cane, her hands shaking from age. But she had been my first mentor, the one who saw potential in a young officer when no one else did. She had taught me that leadership wasn't about power. It was about service. It was a deliberate choice, a statement. Rank is earned in the trenches, not inherited through DNA. As Elena's trembling hands fastened the silver oak leaves onto my collar, I looked down at my father. He was crying. Not the performative tears of a man who wants to be seen grieving. These were quiet, silent tears, rolling down cheeks that had lost their firmness, dripping onto the lapels of his civilian suit. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't try to hide them. He caught my eye and offered a small, wobbly smile. It was a sad smile. The smile of a man who realized too late that he had spent 30 years betting on the wrong horse, but was grateful, deeply, profoundly grateful, that he was allowed to watch the race finish. I nodded at him. A small nod. Acknowledgement. Not forgiveness. That was too complicated a word for what had passed between us. But acceptance. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice clear and steady. Command is not a privilege. It is a burden. And it is a burden I will carry for you, not over you. I didn't quote Sun Tzu. I didn't quote Patton. I spoke to them like humans. I treated them with the dignity that I had starved for when I was a young officer sitting at the back of a briefing room, being called a zero by his own father. After the ceremony, the reception line formed. Punch and sheet cake. Officers and their families milling around, making small talk. The atmosphere was light. Celebratory. My father stayed in the back, holding a paper cup of punch, watching me work the room. He didn't try to take over. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell war stories or command attention. He just watched, respecting the boundaries we had built brick by brick over the past decade. A young officer approached me. Second lieutenant. Fresh out of the academy. Her uniform was stiff and new, her bearing nervous and uncertain. "Sir," she squeaked. "Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins. I just wanted to say congratulations." I smiled, remembering the terrified young man I used to be. "Thank you, Lieutenant. How are you adjusting to the squadron?" She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's hard, sir," she admitted. "My family. My dad is a colonel in the Marines. He thinks the Air Force is a soft branch. He wanted me to be a lawyer. He says I'm wasting my potential in intelligence work." I froze. The words were different, but the melody was exactly the same. The ghost of my past, echoing in this young officer's voice. I handed my piece of cake to an aide and turned my full attention to her. "Lieutenant, look at me," I said firmly. She looked up, eyes wide. "I'm going to tell you something that took me 33 years and a lot of heartache to learn." I stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to shield her from the room. "Your father may have given you your name, but he doesn't get to write your story." She blinked. "Do not let anyone define your value," I continued. "Not your enemies, not your commanders, and certainly not your blood. You are not here to be his legacy. You are here to build your own." She straightened up. It was subtle, a shifting of weight, a squaring of shoulders. But I saw it, a spark in her eyes, the beginning of a backbone. "Yes, sir," she said. And this time, her voice didn't squeak. "Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel." "Carry on, Lieutenant." As she walked away, walking a little taller than before, my father approached. He had been watching from across the room. He had heard every word. "That was good advice," he said quietly. "I wish someone had said that to me when I was her age." He paused. "I wish I had said it to you." I looked at him. The old man in the civilian suit, the ghost of the general he used to be. "You're saying it now," I said. "That counts for something." He nodded slowly. Then, awkwardly, he reached out and patted my arm. "You wear it better than I did," he said. It was the closest he would ever come to saying, "I was wrong." The closest he would ever come to, "I'm proud of you." The closest he would ever come to, "I love you." And you know what? It was enough. I am Lieutenant Colonel Lucas Neves. I am a ghost no more. For years, I let my father hold the pen to my story. He wrote me as a disappointment, a shadow, a zero. But the moment I took that pen back, I realized I was none of those things. I was a warrior. Setting boundaries with toxic family isn't an act of hate. It's an act of radical self-love. You don't need their permission to be great. You don't need their apology to move forward. Your value is not a gift they give you. It's a fortress you build yourself. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You are the commander of your own life. Own it.